Disenchantment, a state of the modern world by which the people living in it have lost all sense of magic and the spiritual. The undeniable magic of the universe becomes belief. Belief becomes superstition, and superstition withers away with the silts of time. The world is emptier and poorer for it. But all is not lost. There are weird pockets of the world where magic still dwells. And perhaps the most important thing, there are still those with a heart bold enough to go find them. This is the story of the Cottingley Fairies. It's the year 1917 and things lately have gone quite awry. English countryside. The First World War has been raging, industrialization has been growing, and technology seems to advance at breakneck speed. Photography, for example, is new tech and a new art form, and there are already those who are well versed in it. But to most people it seems like the pinnacle of science or perhaps even magic. Picture this, we're in the English countryside, there are two girls, they're cousins. Elsie is 16 and Frances, just recently arrived with her family from South Africa, is now 9. This is the village of Cotingly. How did you spend your summers as a child, especially if you were lucky enough to go into the countryside? These girls were having a beautiful, idyllic summer, playing in the garden, staying out till nightfall, creating their own imaginary worlds together, and they loved to play in the creek at the bottom of the garden, which I would too, evidence. This annoyed their mothers, who thought that they were just getting dirty on purpose, and they justified their actions by saying that they were going down to the creek to see the fairies. And to prove it, they grabbed Elsie's father's camera. He was an amateur photographer and had already taught his daughter fundamentals of taking images, of processing and revealing the image afterwards. So the girls took the camera down to the creek and came back with this image. The parents dismissed it. It's just, just children playing, normal. And then they went down again and they brought back this image. The father told them they couldn't use his camera anymore. If nothing else had been going on, maybe the story would have ended there and we wouldn't be talking about it today. But that wasn't all there was to it. Elsie's mother, Polly, was a spiritualist. What is that? We have to go back. In 2019, what am I even thinking? I meant 1919. Elsie's mother attends a meeting of the Theosophical Society. The topic of the event is fairy life. She shows them the photographs and everyone goes crazy over them. 2 weeks later, at a different conference, photographs get shown again. Here we find a guy called Gardner, who was important in the Theosophical Society. And here also, the Cottingley Fairies become a matter of public history. But what is spiritualism? Basically, spiritualism is a 19th and 20th century religious current that proposed the existence of a spiritual, unseen realm just alongside us. Their idea was that using technological and scientific advances, they could perceive and communicate with it. Humanity was in a process of evolution as a collective and each individual. This even continued possibly after death. The world of spirits was supposed to be more advanced in its progress, then speaking with them would help us advance as well. At the beginning of the 20th century, we have a period of expansion of the British colonial empire ruled by a feeling of progress, growing industrialization, going upwards, a promise of a reign of science and logic that would explain everything in the world, that would make the previously impossible possible for everyone. But there's a dark side. Poverty was on the rise, separation of people from the land and from the traditional communities was almost complete. Colonial rule was imposed over vast numbers of people. At a very basic level, the world was becoming disenchanted. Now, in what way was the world enchanted before? In this book, the author explains how the pre-modern, pre-capitalist world was magical. Belief in the spiritual world was woven into the mundane. The devil, fairies, God were just as real and impacted the life of normal people just as much as eating or setting the kettle to boil. I forgot my coffee. That's better. People knew themselves to be living alongside a spiritual, magical realm that perhaps they could manipulate for their own gain. Magic was just a rational part of the supernatural universe in which they lived. So why did this magic worldview get lost in the transition to capitalism and industrialization. Silvia Federici explains it in this way. Magic is premised on the belief that the world is animated and predictable, and that there is a force in all things that people could harness to, I don't know, get rich without having to work. The thing is that the capitalist organization was laying claim to natural resources and also to people. To the time, the idea that just anyone could control nature was a dangerous one. Also one that would disrupt the rational work process that was needed for profit. And so, through, among other things, the Great Witch Hunt, this magical worldview was punished and gradually erased in favor of a world of reason in which science and productivity rule supreme. But then we get movements like spiritualism, which were trying to bridge these two worldviews in a way that helped people make sense of this chaotic world they were living in. One of the subcurrents of spiritualism was Theosophy, which described itself as a positivistic religion. And here we get figures like Gardner and Conan Doyle. Yes, that Conan Doyle. One might think this person who invented the most rational detective of literature shouldn't be here contacting mediums. But Theosophy was trying to explain the hidden mysteries of the natural world. They thought everything that was spiritual was simply hidden, and maybe among all the many ways in which technologies were making progress, we could start contacting the spiritual. So after Polly made the two first photos public, Gardner, who found them at that conference in Harrogate, recruited the help of a photography expert called Harold Snelling, who actually said that the photographs were genuine, hadn't been tampered with, and cleared them for use in magazines. So they published them, and they reached Conan Doyle, who was indeed very interested in spiritualism and thought that if fairies were real, then maybe a lot of other things in the spiritual realm were as well. If photography allowed us to find and communicate with these beings, then maybe we could move humanity forward. So Gardner contacted 3 photography experts. The first one was Snelling. The second one belonged to Kodak, who said that the photos themselves showed no faking, but they couldn't possibly be true because fairies were obviously not real. And the third, belonging to a different photo studio, said that the photos had been tampered with. And other people who saw the photos in the magazine thought that the fairies looked suspiciously like French dancers. So we have the first 2 photos taken in 1917. They go public in mid-1919, and in August of 1920, Gardner and Conan Doyle decided to prove that the images were real once and for all. And so Gardner went back to Cottingley. Now, at this point, Elsie was 19 and Frances was 13. Gardner gave them both cameras and left them to their own devices. The girls said that the fairies wouldn't show themselves if there were other people present. Smart, clever girls. And somehow this made sense to people, and they left them alone with the cameras, and they produced 3 other pictures. So now we have Frances with the fairies, Elsie with the gnome, Frances and the leaping fairy, Fairy offering a posy to Elsie, and fairies and the sandbath. Conan Doyle was so convinced that he published an article that read, "The recognition of the fairies' existence will jolt the material 20th century mind out of its heavy rut in the mud and will make it admit that there is a glamour and mystery to life." Now, the magazine with his article sold out instantly. The reception was mixed. A lot of people were like in disbelief. How have these children managed to trick such a smart man? On the other hand, a children's author went like, "Oh, how lovely that these children have been given this marvelous gift," and took the photos at face value just because Elsie and Frances looked truthful. Then a medical doctor said that allowing children to believe in fairies was going to cause them mental problems later in life. And so the whole thing also became entangled with early 20th century ideas about children. Why do we associate fairies with children today? It has a lot to do with the concept of the social evolution of humanity. In the Victorian era, it became widespread to think humanity was going through subsequent periods of progress, and that certain ways of thinking corresponded to each one of this. It was thought that there were societies that were more primitive, they believed in spiritual things, and the normal progress of mankind was towards science. This was also reflected, according to this theory, in an individual's progress through life. So children were thought to be in a sort of state of innocence, not yet marred by the logics of the world, were more in contact with these spiritual entities. I think this explains why no one questioned why it was only Elsie and Frances that could see the fairies. None of this deterred Gardner, who 1 year later, in 1921, paid a third visit to Cottingley, this time in the company of a famous occultist called Geoffrey Hudson. This time, Elsie and Frances now didn't see any fairies, but Hudson saw them everywhere. Eventually, as it happens, the fairy craze subsided and people went back to think about other things. But what happened to Elsie and Frances? Initially, they faded from the public eye. Oops. But in 1966, someone found them. Elsie was interviewed, and at this time, she didn't say that the pictures were fakes, but she no longer said that they had truly photographed fairies. What she stated was that they had managed to capture figments of their imagination. And then almost 20 years later, in 1983, both Elsie and Frances, who were now 82 and 76, admitted that they had faked the photographs. They copied illustrations from Princess Mary's gift book and drew wings in them, and then used hat pins to pin them on the grass. However, both Elsie and Frances still said that they had actually seen fairies. And while Elsie said that the fifth photo was fake, Frances said that that one was unplanned and completely real. But both Elsie and Frances remembered taking this photograph, so what happened? Maybe a double exposure? In the final interview in 1985, both of them said that they had never thought of it as a fraud. They had never set out to deceive anyone. They were just having fun, and then all these people started trying to believe in it. Frances specifically said, "It was just Elsie and I having a bit of fun, and I can't understand to this day why they were taken in. They wanted to be taken in." Why the story worked. The folklore of fairy in the British Isles has a long history and roots in both Celtic and Nordic traditions. You can learn all about it in this video right here. And in all of this traditional knowledge, previous to the 16th century and the advent of capitalism, fairies were not the tiny, cute beings a lot of people might imagine today. They were quite similar to humans, but different. Human-sized, but very beautiful. Their gender characteristics were blurry, they were ruled by a queen, and they were dangerous. If you met the fairies, you could expect either to be taken away from your world, never to return, or perhaps to receive a wonderful gift, like telling prophecies, turning lead into gold. They were also connected to the land in an intrinsic, innate way, and could give you favors as well as terrible punishments for like destroying the wood they inhabited. In the 16th century, they become small, and by Victorian times, when industrialization and the requirements of capitalism had already destroyed people's connection to the land, their traditional ways of living and conveying knowledge, people were yearning to recover what was lost. And so we get a lot of students of folklore, a discipline born from this sense that something essential was being lost. And we also get movements like spiritualism and an overall obsession with a romanticized version of the pre-capitalist past. Does that sound familiar? We also get people trying to put together these two very different worldviews by creating scientific explanations for folklore and supernatural phenomena. Theories about whether fairies might have been a historic ethnic group that inhabited Europe. In the case of the spiritualists, they tried to use the new scientific advances and technologies to prove the existence of a spiritual realm. This included the new technology of photography. So why did people do that? Why did they want to believe? Why do we want to believe? Maybe we as digitally literate 21st century folk look at these pictures and go, that's obviously fake. But how many people today can't tell if a picture has been generated by AI or not? And at that point, we have to realize that photography was pretty new. People were not trained to see a fake. And even beyond that, is it so hard to understand that someone might want to live in a world that is not ruled by hard, cold logic? The people of the late 19th and early 20th century were living in a world that was ravaged by wars, which were showing them the worst parts of human nature. They were experiencing generally poor living conditions, a growing control over their daily lives from the state and industrial employers. Their whole society had embraced an idea of the world that was disenchanted. Profit ruled over everything else. This defined how people thought, felt, and even perceived the world on a very basic level. A lot of people didn't like it. Which worldview is most productive? One in which we believe that this forest is a sacred place inhabited by fairies. If you disturb it, like to build a road or a factory, the fairies are going to come and punish you. Or a worldview in which nature is just an object there for the taking, devoid of spirit and existing only for our benefit. Then again, which of these two worlds would you rather live in? I know which one I would choose. Gardner, Conan Doyle, Elsie's mother, I think they wanted to believe in the reality of the Cottingley Fairies because it allowed them to live in a world that was more meaningful. If these garden fairies existed, maybe it meant that spirits in general existed, and maybe we weren't quite so alone at the pinnacle of this hierarchical pyramid of creation that imperialism had created for us. And people today still want to believe in fairies. I made this poll on my Instagram and it was quite telling. Now, of course, this is biased, right? The fact that you are here watching this video, the fact that fairy observation societies have existed for a very long time. Just in general, the fact that people are so drawn to what is spiritual, mystical, and paranormal, it means we're still holding out hope that perhaps we might still revive, restore, and re-enchant this world that we live in. So, were the Cottingley Fairies a fraud? I don't think so. Sure, the photographs were fake, at least 4 of them. But both women would always say that they had actually seen the fairies. Maybe they didn't look just like that, but to them, they were real. So whether you want to believe or not, which world you want to live in, that's on you. I hope that you enjoyed this fairy video. If so, please subscribe and tell me in the comments whether you believe that Elsie and Francis actually saw fairies and whether you believe in fairies. And if you really loved this video, then subscribe to my Patreon to keep my channel going. Blessed be the fairy-hearted.